So I was living in Malad, Idaho, which is about 45 minutes away from here, and I lived there for 15 years. When I moved there, I didn't expect to last there because it has to be 80% Mormon, religious folks. And I thought, wow, gosh, I'm not going to be welcome there, right?
Okay, here we are. Hey, Scott.
Hello, Tom.
Thanks so much for being here. I've been looking forward to this chat with you. I'm just turning it to you, and maybe starting from who are you, and who is my friend Scott?
Who is my friend Scott? So my name's Scott Danielson. I had a BookTube channel for a little while. I think that's where I met you and started to follow you. Loved your Dante and all that stuff. Met a lot of booktubers that I call friends now. But yeah, I live in Logan, Utah. I'm in administration at a technical college. I'm an electrical engineer. Worked most of my career in manufacturing plants and such, programming machines. So that's me. 55, 2 grown kids, wife. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Scott, and thank you for being here. This is
thank you for having me. I'm excited.
This kind of I call it a series, and I've chosen the title "Searching and Finding" to mean the point that I'm trying to make it useful to people that can compare their own spiritual research with everybody else's, and with mine, with yours, and see what resonates, what can bring some inspiration as well.
Yeah, that's great. I love what you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you. So where I would like to start from is the usual slightly difficult question, because the spiritual journey is something very personal, and it's also something very complex. When I try to summarize mine, it's not easy. I cannot say it down in just 2 words. But so I apologize in advance for asking the difficult question. But as a high level outline, how would you outline your spiritual journey so far, and if it was a matter of summarizing it?
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I was born and raised Catholic. In my house, my dad is who I would point to. He was a person who went to mass every Sunday. But at 13 or so, right around confirmation time, I remember me and I have 2 older brothers. We were all getting ready for confirmation, and I pushed back pretty hard at that point. I had decided that it was really a science religion thing. I had, and here I am at 13. I like to say that my Mr. Rogers was Mr. Spock, because I grew up on Star Trek, and Spock to me was, in a way, how I viewed myself. He was like a person of 2 pieces, and I couldn't reconcile those. So I always had a religious urge, always. But at that point, I remember I pushed back really hard, and I didn't want to go to the confirmation classes. And I remember this is a pivotal moment in my life, sitting down with my dad. My dad said, "Hey, let's talk about this." And we sat down, and I think, in talking to him later in life, he just needed to know that I just wasn't being a jerk. When we sat down and we discussed it, and I expressed that I really didn't believe, I really wasn't there. That was all it took for him. And he said, "Okay, I will not make you go." And that, I've talked to him since, and he's told me that he wished he had made me do it. And I said, "No, I think what you did was exactly the right thing," because it never left me. It never once left me. So there I went through the rest of high school, into college, and I was always interested. There was always little things, that, I was always kind of looking that direction, just constantly just looking. And I feel like if he had kind of made me go through that at a time when I just wasn't present there, that that may have gone away. It may have gone away completely. I don't know. But yeah, like I said, I was like that. And I went through a long period of searching. I looked into a lot of different things. I was always interested in spiritual things. I would read spiritual things. Went through the Joseph Campbell phase that a lot of us did in I would say the 90s. Joseph Campbell, who said all mythology is mankind's attempt to describe the transcendent, which, I believe that Joseph Campbell believed existed. There's just something there that we humans know that is there, but can't quite grasp.
Yeah.
And then, so I would kind of flit around on the top of things, never delving into anything, but just kind of looking at things and saying, oh, Buddhism's interesting, but never practicing it. What does Islam believe? That's interesting, but never delving into that. And then, so I'm in Utah, which of course is a very Mormon area. So it is a very religious area. I know that a lot of people live in what they would call a secular place. I very much don't. Religion permeates here. There's a lot of religious people here. And, you get into conversations with coworkers. And so I would have to say it was in looking into the Mormon faith that made me understand a little bit deeper what the Catholic faith was. And then I started at that point looking again deeper into the Catholic faith. And then I said, well, where's a mass where I am? And at this time I was in Malad, Idaho, a little town. I lived there for 15 years. But then I started to attend. It was a tiny congregation, got to know everybody. Next thing you know, I'm getting the confirmation. And from there, now I'm very deep into it. I'm the RCIA coordinator at my church. So I regularly meet people that have questions about the faith, and also run the religious education class that leads people to baptisms. And I've been doing that in some capacity for about 8 years now. And so I'm 55 now. I think I would have got confirmed, would have been my late 20s. And so it's been that long ago. But yeah, it's very much a part of my life now.
Yeah. So, wow, thank you for this perfect kind of bird's eye view on the story.
Yeah.
I've been able to, I think, pick up on a couple of really, really fascinating points. Number one, the liberating effect of your father's reaction, your father's approach, and how open, understanding, probably loving he's been in who knows where your journey could have gone if he hadn't reacted that way, if he had been more forceful, right?
I completely agree. And, I say that's a seminal moment. I remember it. It's like one of those flashbulb memories, sitting down with my dad. My dad had converted to marry my mom, so my last name is Danielson, so I'm half Swedish. He's 100% Swedish. So he was coming from a Lutheran background.
Lutheran, right.
Yeah. And, he converted when he married my mom, who's Irish Catholic. So, so for him, it was a journey for him, and I can imagine what he was feeling at the time is like, I joined this church, and I consider us close, me and my dad. My dad's still with us, and we went to Rome together, just me and him. My first time ever in Europe. We went to Rome. It was February 2020. Right when we got home is right when things were getting bad with COVID up in northern Italy. Yeah, so it was terrific trip. It was really great trip. So yeah, we share that a lot.
God bless him. Did you guys get to visit the Vatican or maybe even see Pope?
Yeah, it was a really terrific trip. So he spends part of his time in Miami, and then part of it up here in Idaho, which is a town I grew up in, Idaho Falls, and they split their time. Him and my mom split their time between the two. But so down in Miami, the Archbishop down there, he was doing an ad limina visit, and he advertised, "Hey, anybody who would like to go, this is a tour package." And so we jumped on with him. So we were in the Vatican with an archbishop, and that was awesome. It was great. Just some of the things we got to do were just magnificent. Yeah. They opened the doors for the archbishop. I tell you that.
Exactly. You got the fast line ticket.
Yeah, it was a great trip, and I had never experienced anything like that, and I was eager to go, and yeah, we did the papal audience, we did the catacombs under the Vatican. I don't know if you call those catacombs, the down there where Peter's buried.
Yeah.
Yeah, we went down there, and yeah, and it was just, yeah, I still just love that trip. Yeah.
Very exciting and fantastic to be able to do it before COVID arrived. So just before it, right?
Just before, yeah.
And then something that also hit me that you mentioned was it seems like, correct me of course, but it sounds like one of the things that, well, obviously it wasn't Star Trek by itself, but one of the things that really hit your spiritual journey and brought it to a temporary halt maybe was these intellectual hesitations that you had, probably from maybe a similar way to my own experience, reading a lot of science fiction, being invested in the transcendental part of science fiction, because science fiction has a lot of spiritual and transcendent, let's say, areas to it.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I don't know that I saw that, and I think that might have been part of the thing, because I would read, Asimov and Clarke, and so I wasn't reading a lot of very spiritual people. Arthur C. Clarke is a fascinating example, but he was one of my favorites. I mean, the first science fiction book I ever read, it was called Dolphin Island by Arthur C. Clarke.
I know it very well.
Yeah, so by Arthur Clarke. Yeah, and I loved it. And it just, I mean, that captured me, and I was reading all the Clarke I could, but Arthur C. Clarke would, he was an atheist. So there was no God, but yet The Star, that short story, The Star, when people ask me what my favorite story is, I say that one, even though what the subject matter is, but because to me, it was like, this Jesuit in space, that's the reality that captured me was, oh, this exists in the future. You know what I mean? When so much of the time, what I felt like I was being taught is that it wouldn't exist in the future, that this was something that humanity was going to grow out of, which was a very scientific kind of belief, in the late 80s and 90s. I mean, sure, it's surely around today too, but I was being captured up in some of that and reading some of that and starting to very much see those things as two different things. Yeah. It wasn't until later in life that I realized, oh, this is really one thing. And when you look at the history of science and stuff, which you very much know in some of the stuff that you've written, but the idea, I mean, a lot of the people that were coming up with science were Catholics, and you're like, okay, well, here's Mendel who's looking at genetics, and he's a Catholic monk, and you're like, okay, well then these people are telling me this, but this is a Catholic monk that came up with genetics, so. Or who discovered some of the genetic stuff. So, eventually I pulled all that together, and it is certainly no longer a problem now. But I did. That was a speed bump, no doubt.
Yeah. I would say, without being too harsh on our younger selves, science fiction, especially the golden age science fiction, we can say that it was so. And it still is today, so attractive and magnetic for a young, curious mind, an intellectually curious mind, that it makes so much sense. However, all the great geniuses of science fiction, just like Arthur Clarke, just like Asimov, just like, all the names, just pick one, they had never had the chance, for only with maybe a couple of exceptions, but I'm talking about 99% of them. They never had the chance to deepen any theological topic or subject, because they were coming from completely different backgrounds. Yes. Their job was to speculate on science. Most of them were scientists, and by the way, they also kind of ran in a similar environment. They were part of a circle. And to be cool in this circle meant to be atheist, because you were strong-minded to go beyond what were, the weak myths of religion.
Yeah.
And these ideas found so many echoes in all their stories, in all their novels, because to find that point of convergence, which obviously exists and which obviously is true between science and faith, is not easy. It's not something easy. It's not something that our culture teaches very well, if not at all, right?
Right. I completely agree with that. And yet you can find some writers, and yet they still tend to be from this atheistic background, that are writing religious things. Even Clark, for example, he's like, well, there is no God, but there are godlike aliens. It's like he's got to replace that. He's got to put something in that hole, over and over. But I look at people like, one of my favorite writers is Ted Chiang.
Yes.
Favorite book, Stories of Your Life and Others, who writes a lot about religious themes. Yet I don't believe that I don't think he's a believer.
He's not. He's not.
But yeah, but it's fascinating. And I think that he's fair. I think that he's exploring philosophy. In fact, I've read interviews where he says, yeah, that's what I'm doing, is, taking these philosophical ideas and trying to make them concrete in a situation that characters can go through, and trying to understand what the outworkings of that would be. And that has become my favorite kind of science fiction to read. I'm constantly seeking that out, and I love it when I find it, and I grab onto it, even if it is from an atheistic background. But there are people from all kinds of faiths writing science fiction.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been gravitating towards as an adult.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You also mentioned that then, in your 20s, when you went back to your faith, it sounds like, again, it was, at least in part, driven by some readings and some books. Is there some kind of title that you can think of that you still today
sure
consider life-changing?
Yeah, I would say, well, St. Augustine was big. Confessions was an important book to me and remains so. But for me, a lot of it was, I had a friend named Steve Erickson, and he became a pastor. I think he's evangelical. So, in fact, I know he's evangelical. I've lost touch with him. So, hi, Steve. If you happen to watch this, that would be awesome if you'd reach out. But that is when I started, in conversation with him, is when I started to realize that this was reasonable. And that was a seed. I mean, he was like a high school friend. So this was into, like, let's say, a year out of high school. Those seeds stayed with me. And he pointed me to someone who, his name is Ravi Zacharias, who has since been, he was a Baptist, I believe, but he's passed away. But it turned out there was some issues in his life that have come to light that have disgraced him. So, but in some of his lectures, and those were lectures I was given on cassette, that led me to some philosophical things. And he was simply speaking in a philosophical way about Christianity, and that threw the doors open. So from there, I was starting to look at things, quite a bit, but yeah, I don't know if I'd say I can point to some seminal Christian books. I mean, there was Mere Christianity. There was a lot of C.S. Lewis. But I don't have anything I can hold up and say, this was it,
Yeah.
But it was a lot of talks. And then there was one other person that was pivotal to me. His name is, he was Father Nick Hackiel, who was an Episcopalian priest that I got to know as a friend through a friend. And he became important to me. We had many, many discussions, Friday night, drinking a little bit, talking into the night.
Always helps.
Oh, it's great. And that to me, he taught me the value of community. He would say things to me like, you've got to say these things out loud, he says only in community can you realize what it is that you're thinking. So sitting there by yourself and thinking, you can go down a lot of incorrect paths. And I'm pretty introvertish, so my tendency is quiet. Work is chaos. home is quiet, right? So it's like, I use up my chaos at work, and then I come home and it's like, reading and things like that. So he opened that door up to me. And then ever since then, and that's when I realized when I rejoined or started to participate again in the Catholic Church, I fully understood what community is. And
That's
I've
beautiful.
been participating in that ever since. Yeah. It was an important thing. Yeah.
Very
so
important.
it was people more than books, I would say. I was reading books.
Yeah.
But it was people.
Yeah. So it's true that something that seems to be a recurring aspect of many reconversion stories or conversion stories is it's about a meeting. And this meeting can be a meeting with people, obviously, usually is a meeting with people in real life, real people. But at the same time, a meeting of minds with a book, because somebody has written and communicated to you through their book something. No? And that's a meeting too.
Exactly. And those attitudes are what led to that podcast I do that you were a guest on. Or I do a podcast called A Good Story is Hard to Find. Been doing it for 12 years now and still moving. And you were a guest on that podcast, and thank you very much.
Very happy to be there.
Yeah.
Thank you again. I'm going to link it below, by the way.
Please do. Thank you. That's great. So what happened there is I was on another podcast. It was a science fiction podcast, had nothing to do with Catholicism. And me and a friend named Julie Davis, who does a blog. She's done a blog for many, many years called Happy Catholic.
Hey, Julie.
Yeah, we were both on this podcast called SFF Audio with other science fiction fans. And we talked about The Star's My Destination by Alfred Bester. After that podcast, I wrote her an email and I said, as a Catholic, this book hits me thus. And those things were unsaid in that secular group. And it's partly because I didn't think of them till after. But she wrote right back and said, yeah, that's very interesting. And what about this, And one thing led to another, and it led to that podcast where we're reading books together. So again, this is community, right? But the thing is, and they're not Catholic books. They don't have, some of them are. Like when you were on there, we read Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
But we'll read, I'm trying to think. The last one we just did is called Persuasion by Jane Austen. And, that's not a Catholic book, but we discuss it as Catholic people.
Through Catholic lenses.
In community, you know what I mean? And that's what the podcast is. And we've been just doing that ever since. Yeah. And, but that, those attitudes about community and those doors being thrown open philosophically, those are like all there present in those discussions.
Yeah. And it's so true what you mentioned about when you're by yourself, it doesn't matter who you are, alone with your own thoughts, trying to wrestle with your thoughts. Very often you might be thinking, that's the Holy Spirit inspiring me, that's God inspiring me, but actually somebody else.
Yeah.
Who has a grip on your thoughts. And
sure.
And it's really the community, the group and the connection, the meeting that helps you try to be a little bit more honest with yourself.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. You need somebody to tell you, hey, you're off track here, right? I remember I saw a thing, Ron Howard, the director, he said that he likes 3 people. When he's developing something, 3 people is important to him, right? He said it's the perfect number because one of those 3 is going to step out and say, hey, this isn't working. But 2 might not happen, right? And one person doesn't want to offend somebody or whatever. And alone, of course, it's not going to happen, right? So again, it's 3, and I thought that was very cool.
Right, there must be a reason.
3 is a good number. Yeah.
Exactly, there must be a reason why they picked it for the perfect number.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So when again, I'm really curious about the moment in your 20s. Was there a specific doctrine, a specific idea, a specific concept that belongs to Christianity that kind of unlocked everything for you, or was
it did. So remember I said it was in looking at the Mormon Church, the LDS Church.
Yeah.
So what I was doing there, they have the missionaries, they come over and they talk to you, and they kind of present their church to you. And so I was looking at that, and they were presenting, what they call the apostasy. So it was a few things that were coalescing. First of all, all the way up to that point, I was realizing that I had the Catholic answers, right? Which meant if somebody asked a question, my natural inclination was something that Catholicism would agree with. Those felt correct to me. So in talking about the apostasy and what the apostasy is in the Mormon Church is that the church was founded by Christ, but then we fell away, and then it needed to be restored, and it was restored in the 1800s. So in their description of that, I was like, what does the Catholic Church say about that? Of course they don't believe in the apostasy. But then I was looking at that, and I was looking at how the Bible came to be with the church fathers. The church fathers were super important, right? And I'm looking at all this stuff, and I realized how amazing it was, and how incredibly deep it was, and how I'm never going to get to the end of that road. You know what I mean? And so that was the flood at that point. So it was in looking at those claims and coming up to a different conclusion that I realized what the Catholic Church was and how much sense it made. And then that was the final thing. It was like, from that point on, it was that now I'm a participant, and only when I became a participant did depth start to occur.
That's right? Beautiful. It's not the first time that I hear that it's the richness and depth of the Catholic Church that at some point, once discovered, because discover it, because it's not, let's say, easy to discover, because it needs to open up to you and your part effort, right? And
the idea of mystery is vital. The idea that we can embrace the fact that we don't know all of it. And that we may not have everything correct. You know what I mean? It's like if God is who we think he is, that we can understand that is impossible, right? Wasn't it Augustine who was talking about, like, anytime you write down a definition for God, you do not have it. So you look at, Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel and that painting of God, in creation, and you say, okay, well, that's not God, right? It's some aspect that the artist is trying to convey, but it's impossible to paint that. Right. And it's impossible to write a book that contains that. And it's impossible for us to have a conversation that contains that. And that is so correct. It's like, falling into a pillow bed or whatever. It's like, this is right. It has to be that way. How can it not be that way?
I love what you just said about Michelangelo, because thinking, having it fairly fresh, I've been there only a couple of years ago myself, and thinking back, maybe the only thing that gets you close to God when you're looking at Michelangelo's art is that kind of pricking of your soul that happens when you're looking at his work. Not as much what the object that he is painted, but the beauty is the beauty.
Right. Exactly.
So this is all fantastic. One other question, and this is actually something that's peculiar to your journey, because you also brought it up, because you live in Utah, and given that you could say that you're surrounded by the Mormon Church. Of course, you're not the only Catholic in Utah, but more. But how do you live that? How do you experience your living your faith in a place like Utah? How open do you feel like you can be, not only in your normal day-to-day life, but also in your job and everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I remember, so I was living in Malad, Idaho, which is about 45 minutes away from here, and I lived there for 15 years. When I moved there, I didn't expect to last there because it was that's about it has to be 80% Mormon religious folks. And I thought, wow, gosh, I'm not going to be welcome there, right? But I never, not once, felt unwelcome. The Mormon people I've found to be terrific people, and we agree. It's like we may not agree in philosophy, but we do agree on a lot of the outworkings of the faith. So in other words, I'm very comfortable in a Mormon community simply because our values are similar. And it's like, so I'm surrounded by people who share a lot of the same values. Now, things at work and stuff, I have never felt in any way unable to express anything.
Or
like on my desk, I usually have, there's a rosary on my desk, and my two best friends at work are both Mormons, and we talk all the time about religion, and it's very open, and I love it, so I haven't had any trouble at all.
Yeah. So once again, there's probably, and correct me if you think that's wrong, but there's probably more common ground, more familiarity, more commonality between a Catholic and a Mormon than between a Catholic and a purely secular atheist who doesn't want to hear about religion.
I would say so. Yeah. And especially, the people in the government and all this other stuff. I mean, Utah is a very successful state. They're, lots of hardworking folks here, and we weather economic trouble very well. The state itself's in terrific shape. We're super fast growing, and I'm in education, so that's booming as well. So I mean. So I guess I'm saying I just haven't had any problem, and heck, and part of it, is I'm not threatened by that. I guess I would have to say, so when I first moved there, with the attitude that I had, like, oh shoot, I'm probably not going to live here very long because I'm worried about that, and so that was inside me, and of course they're going to come forward and say, hey, have you thought about the Mormon Church, right? And at the beginning, I felt threatened by that, right? Like, but I eventually got to a point where I'm flattered by that. It was like, thank you for saying that, right? And here's some of mine, right? And they would welcome that. You know what I mean? And it became, when someone came over and wanted to talk about that, I'm happy to, And so part of it's my, inner attitude. So there is a lot of proselytizing, in the Mormon Church, and they definitely do that, but it's not uncomfortable if you just accept that, If they left me completely alone and didn't care, wouldn't that be worse? It's like, it's just like, yeah,
I would think so. Yeah.
So I just got to a point where I felt, I welcome those conversations, and neither of us is militant, neither of us is like, anger. There's nothing.
Absolutely.
There's none of that.
No, I think it's St. Paul who says in the New Testament, you just, whatever you do, it with kindness. Do it
absolutely,
because and gently.
Yeah,
that's the base of it.
And I think it's key for all of it. I mean, to be otherwise just doesn't seem right to what Christ was saying in the first place.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So from the philosophical standpoint, this is so interesting. I'm really curious. We mentioned this, you and I, before. There is maybe a radical difference in how the Mormon Church interprets the concept of God. If you compare it to the fathers of the church, if you compare Thomas, would you be able to explain in a couple of words?
Yeah. So, so as an RCA coordinator, when folks come forward from the LDS background, that's one of the things that is always their first question. So and so here I am trying to express another faith, and I'm certain that I'm not going to get it 100% correct. So I would be very open to being corrected. But Jesus, for example, and God were human, or used to be human, and we also, as humans, could someday progress to a point where we could also become a god of perhaps our own planet, something like that, and come up with our own plan of salvation. So that's the general idea, is that, and Jesus in the LDS faith is not God. Jesus is someone that God sent. It was like, Jesus and Lucifer were brothers, and they both had a plan of salvation, and God rejected Lucifer's, which of course angered Lucifer, but Jesus had the best idea, and Jesus is the one who came down, right?
Oh, wow.
So this is very simplistic, I'm sure, and I don't want to offend anybody by getting that wrong, but the idea is basically that a person can progress to godhood. So when they come and you're like, well, let's talk about God, and then they want to know about God, and what is this Trinity thing and all that, well, first of all, when you talk about God, God is outside the universe. God is not an object in the universe. God is outside of it. If he created it, he created time and space. He's outside of that, right? And what does that mean? How is he in the universe? It's like he's in the universe the same way that, like, J.R.R. Tolkien is in Lord of the Rings, right? J.R.R. Tolkien, he wrote Lord of the Rings. He wrote all the words. Is he in it? Well, not really, but yeah, it's like, it's just these analogies. Again, Augustine said we can never get it right. We can never, fully get it. So those are new concepts when they come forward. And then, of course, the Trinity is not something that they believe in. For them, God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are three distinct, different persons, that are not one being in any way.
Yeah. Well, they don't sound like small differences.
No, that's a fairly large difference. Who we believe God is very different.
Yeah. Scott, can I ask you about your, without too many details, of course, but what's your daily or weekly prayer routine, if you have one?
Okay. Yeah, I can tell you what it is currently, because I often change.
Yeah, please.
So right now I like to do a rosary in the morning, and then I end with a compline from the Liturgy of the Hours, and I use there's a Benedictine breviary that I learned from Jason Harrigan. Hello, Jason. But the compline in there does have an examen in it. So I do like that. So basically, so at the end of the day, it's a short thing. But it is an examen, looking for God's influence in your life that day, looking for things that you may not have done well that day, and offering them up to God in prayer at the end of the day.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot, because I also partially use the Liturgy of the Hours and the examen every day, and I find that the examen, it's all personal, of course, but it helps me connect more. It helps me put my prayer more as in the dimension of a dialogue with God, while the Liturgy of the Hour, it's a perfect, let's say, articulation of my deepest feelings, because of the Psalms, because of those type of prayers. But because I'm there reading, whether the compline or whether the office of the liturgy of the hours of the readings, it's a mental activity that is slightly different, and that's where it's beautiful the way they compensate each other, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and currently I just grabbed this because we're both bookish, right? Currently, I'm just starting this one. This is on the Incarnation. It's Church Father Saint Athanasius, and I've just started this one. This one was recommended. We have Utah State University here, and every year they have what they call the Newman Lecture, and they invite someone from somewhere. though I can't recall who the lecturer was. After I was talking to her, and she said, she said, if I was going to recommend a church father for a new convert to read, she said it would be Saint Athanasius on the Incarnation. So,
wow.
I'm picking this up to take a look at it.
Yeah. I'm going to take a note of that. Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
So was it the Newman, as in Cardinal Newman?
Yeah, the Newman Center, they have Newman Centers on campuses all over the country. So the Newman Center is a Catholic church on campus here at Utah State University.
Got it.
Yeah, it's St. Jerome's is the name of the church, but they call it the Newman Center. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, Scott, these were my questions, and I think it's we already painted such a beautiful fresco so far. Is there anything else that you'd like to add in terms of maybe the life of the church as it is today? And we all agree, because sometimes we chat, that these are easy times for the church. They're not easy times for anybody, really. But there is a direction in which we all pray and hope that the church could go. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly do. I've spoken to you before about how I feel like something is going on right now. I mean, that may be an ominous way to say it, but it feels to me like people are coming forward and searching spirituality in a bigger way. We've started to see more people come to us than I've had before in my 8 years anyway, which hasn't been an incredibly long time. But it feels, again, on campus, I feel like there's a lot of people coming forward, and that it feels like something's happening to me here in Logan, Utah. I don't know what it's like everywhere else, but it certainly feels like we are talking to an awful lot of people, and these are people that have come to us. That's what I wish for the church. I certainly do wish we could all get along a little better. I certainly feel that kind of stuff, and I hope that we can focus on that. Bishop Barron talks about, in a relationship, it's the transcendent other that we both love that increases the friendship between people. Like you and myself. God is the transcendent third, and our love of him brings us together. In the same way, we wish that for the whole church,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's and do you see this across pretty much all ages, or do you see some particular age pockets?
Yeah, I see. I think it's a natural thing for people to fall away in their teens and then return when they start to have children. I feel like that's kind of a normal human pattern. I'm seeing a lot of that, but I am also seeing a very vibrant campus church, which is, we're talking 18 to 22-year-olds.
Yeah.
So that, I would say, are mainly the two populations that I'm seeing most.
Beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's I love how you described how the environment seems to have already the right type of the right type of really fertility for the religious conversation. Religion is in the air in Utah, no matter what, right? And that's probably a stark difference with your stereotypical modern town of 2023.
I would imagine so. Like I said, I don't know what's going on elsewhere, but it'd be curious if there's someone else out there who's involved in a religious education at their parish in a city. I would love to hear what they're looking at. What's going on there? I would love to hear that.
Yeah. Scott, this was a pleasure.
Yes.
Thanks
so very much
again. I'm gonna finish this mini interview here, but enormously grateful for your time. Thank you.
Yes. So happy to be here. Thank you, Tom.
Bye.